Good morning, Javatarians. Today we're going to talk about instance variables. That is to say, each instance of a crab is going to be able to keep track of some information, specifically how many worms that crab has eaten. When you're creating a variable, there's a three-step process. You have to declare the variable, that is to say, tell Java that you're going to save some information, initialize the variable, give it a starting value, and at some point in the code you'll have to change the value of the variable, otherwise it's really a constant. So let's walk through that process. The first thing we'll do is declare the variable, and that is typically done at the top of the class, in this case the crab class. So let's see how we do that. So we'll open up the crab class, and at the top of the class, not inside a method, but above all the methods, we're going to tell Java that there is a private integer, and we're going to call it worms eaten. What this does is tell Java, every time you make a new crab, you're going to create an integer that describes that crab, specifically describes how many worms he's eaten. The word private we'll get into more later, but just think of it as the value is private to each of those crabs. Each one will have its own value for the number of worms eaten. So that is declaring the variable. We told Java we're going to be using this integer called worms eaten. Next thing to do is to give it an initial value. In order to do that, well, it makes sense that worms eaten would be 0 to start, but in the context of what we call a constructor. You'll notice there's nothing in there about int, void, or boolean. It's just public crab. What this constructor does is literally construct the object that we're talking about and store any initial information, in this case, the number of worms eaten. Again, this is not a method, so it goes outside of all the methods, and we typically put that also at the top of the class beneath the variable declarations. This will be public because we want other parts of the project to see it. And inside here, we declare the initial values for any attributes the crab will have. In this case, there's just the one, worms eaten. And we make it equal to 0. What this does, every time we make a new crab, that crab will have 0 for the value of worms eaten. The other thing we need to do is to change that value at some point. Otherwise, we don't really have a variable. It's just a constant. Where do we want to change it? Well, in this case, we want to change it every time the crab eats a worm. We want to register that by adding 1 to the value of worms eaten. And the shorthand for doing that is that plus plus symbol. Just take the name of the variable, plus plus, and it will automatically add 1 to the value. And also to see that we're working right, we're going to add a little scoreboard. We're just going to print out the word score. That's what the quotes are for. And then we're going to print the value of the score. Now, in that case, the value is called worms eaten. That's the name of the variable. What will happen now is every time the crab eats a worm, we'll hear the sound. We'll add 1 to the value of worms eaten, and then we will print out the value just to make sure that it's working correctly. Now that's going to happen in the method to eat the worm. So worms eaten plus plus is how we add 1 to the value. System out print line. The score so far. And then the name of the value is stored with the name worms eaten. That's how we'll refer to it. So hopefully I typed everything correctly. Compile. And we'll compile the program. We'll add a few worms and a couple of crabs. And we will run it just to check to make sure that it's working okay. Now we'll throw in a few crabs. And now let's run the world and watch what happens. So you notice the scoreboard came up and it kept track of, it printed the value for worms eaten for each crab. Now you notice it doesn't really go in order because each crab has its own value for worms eaten. If you want it that way, that's fine. So a crab ate a worm, he ate another worm, he ate a third worm, 1, 2, 3. Then a different crab ate a worm. That's why its value for worms eaten went to 1. And it will print each time any crab eats a worm, but each crab has its own value for worms eaten. We'll see one variation of this process in the next video. Thank you for listening, and have an excellent day.